Strange, yet true stories. Tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. Winged Creatures. In November 1966, in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, there were over 200 reported sightings of a huge, winged humanoid creature. Some estimated this creature to be over 8 feet tall. This creature terrorized residents and even abducted family pets. This winged abomination would land on the hood of cars and even terrorize young romantic couples parking. The locals gave this creature a nickname, the Mothman. The last sighting in Point Pleasant was in December 1967, but people all over the world are reporting sightings at an alarming rate. Does this creature really exist? Here are 5 true submitted stories that prove there are strange creatures roaming our skies. 1. It was a crisp autumn evening in the Bronx, typical of any other in my childhood, and the sun was starting to disappear. My best friend was only 8 years old, and I was 7. We had been playing outside for hours and realized it was almost time to go inside for dinner. It was just about dusk, and it was starting to get a bit chilly as the wind blew the fallen leaves around in circles. We picked up our toys and ran up the stairs to find out if dinner was ready yet. The apartment building I lived in was actually a large private house, and when you'd first open the front door, you would see a large, narrow staircase going up about 20 steps to the top floor, with 2 doors on either side of the bottom and top of the stairs. My apartment was on the bottom left. There was a sunroof at the very top of the staircase, between the 2 facing doors of each upstairs apartment, with a good amount of twilight leaking in for us to make out the hallway and each other's faces. As my friend knocked on the door so we could be let in for dinner, I casually glanced up the stairs and was absolutely shocked by what I saw. Praying that my eyes deceived me, I gazed upon a tall, leathery, winged creature with glowing, blood-red eyes standing directly under the light of the sunroof. I could describe it as somewhat reptilian, but with visible human characteristics, albeit gruesome ones. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, and nothing I ever hope to see again. It stood upright on 2 legs, if not a bit stooped over like an old man, had abnormally long arms with what appeared to be talons at the ends of its spindly fingers. The arms were thin, yet muscular. Its torso was unnaturally long as well, and I could easily make out the shape of the thing's rib cage. Its legs appeared strong but gangly, with knobby knees and large, bony feet. I am almost positive there were also long, sharp-looking talons on its toes, but this is more of a vague remembrance, as it is 20 years later. Its wings were rather large, with taut, thin, greenish-gray skin. The skin itself looked to be dry, yet with a bit of gleam to it. Perhaps this was because the skin was pulled so tightly across its bones. It was easy to see the details of its flesh, the wrinkles, the ripple of muscle underneath, with a hint or 2 of what might be veins. As I dared to stare into its sinister face, I couldn't help but notice that the creature's fiery eyes were indeed fixed firmly on us. The being had a large, gaunt skull set on impossibly bony shoulders. This was most definitely a sentient being of some kind, and not knowing its intentions made it all the more terrible to think about. Looking back, I can't tell whether it was merely observing us or whether it might have descended upon us if we'd stayed any longer. It could have been guarding one of the doorways upstairs for all I knew, but when in such a situation, one doesn't really care to find out. Gazing upon this winged creature, gripped by absolute terror and fear of the unknown, it felt as if I'd been there for an eternity. I knew, however, somewhere in my rational mind, that I couldn't have been there for much more than a minute. By this time, My friend had noticed I was too quiet, and I'd been staring upwards, transfixed by this eerie sight. She had obviously just noticed what I'd been seeing for way too long, and the realization was almost too much for us. We were both seeing this unearthly entity, and it was not just my eyes playing nasty tricks on me. We started screaming and pounding on the door, crying, "Please let us in!" And were practically hysterical at this point. The creature still watched us with blazing eyes and boldly stood its ground, probably rather pleased with itself for causing young girls to go out of their minds with such desperate fear. I cannot remember many details of what happened next, because we were both in an intense panic and nobody appeared to be home, no matter how loudly we shouted and pounded our fists on the door. I believe we just couldn't take being in this thing's evil presence any longer, and we ran out the front door to my friend's house. Thankfully, it was only a few houses away, so we didn't have to go far. There we found our mothers sitting at the kitchen table, smoking cigarettes and having coffee as usual. And we explained everything we'd seen. I am very fortunate to have a mother who has always experienced the unexplained, so our seemingly outlandish tale was not met with disbelief, but rather compassion and complete understanding. Later that night, we had no choice but to go back to the apartment so I could sleep and possibly go to school the next morning. I begged my mother to check to see if the horrible thing was still there first, and it was not. So I ran as fast as I could into the apartment and dove into my bed. It's amazing how a comforter on a bed can feel so safe, though it's only mere fabric. I insisted on having the lights and the radio on in a rather feeble attempt to distract myself from the events of the evening. Many hours past my bedtime, in the wee hours of the morning, I finally slept. It was a light, uneasy sleep, with many dreadful dreams where I ran and ran from a nameless thing that chased me endlessly. To this day, I still don't know what it was that we saw so many years ago. As a very young child, I recall having seen at least one ghost and instinctively knew where lost items could be found when asked. Over the years, this ability has been toned down, and I don't always see things as much as feel or sense them, sometimes rather strongly. I've retained my lifelong fascination with the unexplained, which every so often leads me to speculate about this occurrence. It's always been an extremely vivid memory, and I cannot figure out whether this was in fact a demon, a gargoyle, or some other weird creature I've never heard of. It makes me wonder if anyone else has seen something like this, and if anyone else has given it a proper name. 2. A couple of friends and I were walking through the woods like we do almost every weekend, and we went to a place where the school takes all their old equipment. We came across a dead animal lying next to a pond. It was mutilated. Its head was barely still attached to the body, and 2 legs were torn off. When one of my other friends and I went to look at it more closely, its eyes were gone, and whatever cut the legs off, cut them off clean. We suspected it was a hunter leaving it behind or something, so we continued walking. A few minutes later, as we were walking, I saw something standing on a piece of cement about 10 feet to the right of me. When I turned to look to see what it was gone. Directly after that, we heard a loud screeching sound behind me. I asked, and nobody else heard it. When I looked behind me, about the length of a football field away stood the scariest thing I ever saw. It was 8 to 10 feet tall and was completely black except for 2 large red eyes. It had big black angel wings. It pointed at us, said something that appeared to be in a different language, and flew away. Since then, I have never even stepped foot in those woods again. 3. I've never told anyone about this story, mostly because I never knew what it was I saw. But I've been reading stories from witnesses about the Mothman, and I'm starting to believe that's what I saw so many years ago. I can't remember exactly what year it was, but it was in the late 1990s. I was probably 7 or so. I still remember it like yesterday, and I'm 21 now. One sunny afternoon, I was at my mom's stepmom's house in southern Texas. She had a lot of friends and family over for a baby shower or something like that. All of the kids were outside playing, and most of the adults were inside talking and hanging out. One of the kids I was playing with kept telling me about this monster that lived next door. He never really went into detail, but I was drawn in anyway. Being a curious kid, I stayed and looked through the hole in the fence away from the other kids, waiting to see something appear. 5 to 10 minutes later, I remember feeling a giant shadow come over me and hearing the wind as this great creature landed on the other side of the fence facing toward me. I remember it standing on 2 legs, and it had short brown or tanned fur. The nails this thing had were very long and black. I never got to see the face since I was looking through a hole, but this thing was tall, muscular, and breathing heavily at the time. I wasn't able to move at first, but shortly after I ran inside and just stared out the window in disbelief. I never knew what I saw, and it still creeps me out to this day. I believe I saw Mothman, even though I don't recall seeing any wings. This creature came from above. I've been doing a little research as well, and everything else seems to be accurate from what other viewers have seen. But whatever I saw was definitely real. I'll never forget it, and I'll always be wondering. 4. I always took an interest in the whole Mothman phenomena ever since it was brought to my attention with the mainstream Richard Gere movie. The movie didn't inspire the interest more than what the sense of familiarity did, like déjà vu. Right now, with this submission, I finally came to realize what I saw as a child: the Mothman. I lived in Modesto, California for only a short time, and at the time I was only 10 years old. At a neighbor's barbecue one night during the autumn of 1997, a group of the party's kids and I were playing in the backyard. Even now, bits and pieces are missing from my memory, but there are parts I recall. I remember telling the other kids, "Look at the eyes on that fence." The backyard was huge, so the back porch light didn't quite reach all the way to the wooden fence surrounding the yard, and most of the adults were in the house or the front yard drinking and talking. We kids were all creeped out, and I couldn't wrap my head around what I was seeing. 5 pair of reddish eyes against the fence that were at least 7 feet high. I really wanted to get my mother and tell her what I was seeing, but my curiosity lured me in. I walked toward the eyes. I remember seeing shadowy silhouettes with each set of eyes, like men standing upright and crouched down. That moment is when I remember nothing more until I woke up in my mother's arms, who was comforting me at our home. I'm not sure what happened, but I know the party ended early, and most of the kids who were there, I can't remember their faces. We moved back to our hometown that same month. It was before the Tuolumne River flood that I saw those things. 5. Driving on FM 157 between Venus and Mansfield, Texas, my daughter and I were on our way to Walmart. It was sometime in the fall of 2007, around dusk. From my left, something in the sky caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a trash bag that had gotten caught in a wind current. As it got nearer, it seemed to be descending, and I thought of a person stretched out in a glider. Even nearer, and still descending, it looked like a human-like form with wings attached. Never once flapping its wings, it glided toward us. So close to the top of our car, it seemed as though it would land on top of our car. My window was slightly rolled down, and I never heard a sound. I suddenly felt the need to roll my window up and didn't dare stop the car to see what it was. It looked dark brown or black, and the texture of leather, kind of raggedy and worn-looking. It didn't have feathers. Once I realized what I was seeing, I immediately thought of the creature from Jeepers Creepers. Although I didn't see a face, It did have the body of a human, and the wings were somewhat like that of a bat, but not fully extended. I looked in all of my rearview mirrors, but it seemed to have just disappeared. I know what my eyes saw, but my mind was telling me it wasn't real. I said nothing. My daughter didn't say anything either, so I thought that she must not have seen it. About 2 more miles down the road, I asked my daughter, "Did you see?" She immediately cut off my question and said, "Oh my God, yes! What in the hell was that?" I asked her what she had seen, and she said basically the same thing, except that she thought it was a tarp at first instead of a trash bag. After we had discussed what we saw, my daughter opened the inside cover of the sunroof to see if anything was on top of the car, just in case. But nothing was there. It seemed so unreal. After we got home later, we told my husband and stepson what we saw, and they just scoffed at us and said we were crazy. Maybe we are, but we know what we saw, and we don't dare tell just anyone of our experience. These have been 5 true, curated stories about winged humanoid creatures. Do you have a seemingly unreal experience that you would like to share with us? If you do, send us an email at strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com. That's strangebutTrueStories, the number 2, @gmail.com. I'm Steve White. Until next time.